Agile release planning is a critical step in the decision-making process. It helps the product owner and the team decide how much needs to be developed and what functionality the product needs to have in this release. The release plan serves as a guide to the project team and summarizes the expectations of what that team should focus on and what the team needs to deliver. The release plan sits just after the product roadmap in the Agile project hierarchy. The roadmap, as you know, shows a longer-term perspective for the project, while the release focuses more on specific work and shows individual backlog items. In order to plan the release successfully, you should agree on the definition of done. Define your release goal, and you can use SMART goals or clearly determine the conditions of satisfaction. Review and prioritize the backlog, which results in the minimum acceptable features for an Agile release or minimum viable solution. Estimate the release. You should work together with your team to estimate the user stories, develop new estimates if required, and review the estimates with your team. Determine the number of sprints. A sprint can vary from 2 to 4 weeks, and we already reviewed how you would estimate sprint velocity. Knowing velocity and the number of total points, you can easily estimate how long the sprint should be and how many sprints you would need to finish the release. Let's consider an example. Let's assume you and your team determine that the minimum viable release has a total of 120 points. You know that your team can finish 4 points per day. You would like to have 2-week sprints, or 10 days times 4 points is 40 points. Therefore, 120 divided by 40 is 3 sprints. Creating a release sprint is selecting the stories from the sprint and adding them to the sprint backlog. Remember the selected stories based on the business value and ensure that these stories are leading to a minimum viable product. Identify a target for your release. Agile is a flexible tool. However, it is still a good idea to create schedule based on your sprints and set of deadlines. Update release plan continuously. Once you start moving towards your goals, you should update your plans. It's a good practice to freeze sprint backlog and not make changes to it. However, when you are planning your next sprint, you should review your release plan and update it based on what your team has learned. A few good tips for an effective Agile release plan. Monitor your progress and evaluate team velocity continuously and update your burn down chart. Do not release work that is not finished. If things are not going as planned, adjust your plans as needed, but do not cave to the temptation to release a product that is not functioning. Clearly define the roles for the release planning. Make sure it's clearly understood what the product owner, Scrum Master, and team responsibilities are. Once you start planning your sprint, you would start by selecting stories that go to the sprint backlog. After stories are selected, you should not change the backlog anymore. Running a sprint is the only time not to be agile in the Agile project management framework. There are competing frameworks with Agile, and some of them allow constant backlog changes. If you are just beginning your journey as a Scrum Master, I trust it would be wise to stick with this principle. As you and your team matures in Agile practices, you should consider other frameworks and perhaps create a mix of tools that will work for you and your team. There are 2 ways of planning a sprint: a velocity-driven approach and a commitment-driven approach. With the velocity-driven approach, the team adjusts priorities based on what they have learned from the past. A velocity is calculated and updated after each sprint, and the user stories support the iteration goals. In addition, each story is split into tasks by the team, and the tasks are also estimated. To sum it up, the steps are: determine priorities, determine the target velocity, identify sprint goals, select user stories, split user stories into tasks, and estimate the tasks. Another way to plan a sprint is a commitment-driven approach. This approach has many similarities with velocity-driven approach. However, the stories are added to the sprint backlog by the team based on the commitment to deliver these stories. The commitment comes from the team, not from the managers. Let's walk through the steps. Determine the priorities. Identify sprint goals. Select and add user stories to the backlog. Break down stories into tasks. Estimate tasks. Ask the team for the commitment. Add and remove stories based on the team commitment.